Welcome back, grade 11 students. Mr. Rowell here with part 2 of our final unit on application programming. Before we get to actually making some application type functionality, we need to learn a few more things about how to work with information. So far, we figured out how to send information out to a user. We use the system.out.println. Maybe you've been using this for a little bit in your own practice and you're like, this is annoying to type each time. Well, we have a little shortcut. If I type sout, S-out, and then press tab, NetBeans is going to be helpful and automatically populate that with a string ready to go for us. And I can just type in here, hello, and hello is printed. Remember, print line makes it a new line. If I move it to print, then, well, the line above is on its own line. If I make them both prints, then they're side by side. If I make the bottom one print line, then it will print a line after it's done, but it's still on the same line as the one before it. So one thing I've just shown you is throwing a few little scenarios at NetBeans to really try and make sense of what is going to happen when I run a program. And I recommend trying out and testing out different combinations of things just to build your own intuition about what's happening here. What does print line actually mean? It means after this is printed, start a new line. So anything else I add after this, sout, and what now? If I make this just a print, what should happen? Well, it's on a new line because the print line before it created the new line. So we have lots of different scenarios of printing out information. Hopefully it's not too complex to understand as system.out. But we don't just want to be able to print things out. We want to also be able to gather information from a user. And to do that, it's a little bit more complex, although nothing too crazy. We're going to do two different strategies for this. There's many more ways of doing it than just these, but here's the two main ways that we're going to be doing it. The first one is that we can use a visual interface. Now, these visual interfaces are something that when we do user interface development in grade 12, you'll learn a lot more about. For now, it's cool if you just follow along with what I share with you for this particular class and its implementation. It's called a J-option pane. This is Java's built-in way of showing kind of like text outputs and pop-up boxes and things like that, visual elements in your program. And there's many different methods that I'm able to access in this. Now, you'll notice something weird happening right now. When I put the dot for the method reference, it gave me a big list of information here. One thing that's awesome about a program like NetBeans is that it actually shows you live all the options that you have to work with. In Greenfoot, we had to refer to our API all the time to see pop-up things. Greenfoot doesn't have this functionality built in, but NetBeans and many other compilers do. So what things can J-option pane do? Well, there's a short list of them right here of all the different methods that it can reference. And the one that we're going to be using is called show input dialog. And we'll see that there's actually a bunch of different versions of this method that we can reference that all take in different types of information. The one that we're going to be using is the simplest one. It's going to take in the object to display or the message that we want displayed. And I'm just going to click on this, double click on it, and it's going to pop up here. Oops. What's in this as args? I need some information here. And how this works is that inside, I'm going to send it a string of what I want to be in the box. Type something in. Maybe I'll put for this one. Now you'll notice that something was added to my program when I added J-option pane in. This import up here. It imported javax.swing.joption pane. J-option pane is a class that isn't built into Java normally. Remember how many different classes that we were able to see? Let's see here. My Java API. A huge number of them. So how does Java know which classes you want to reference? Well, you could just import all of them every time, but that would be super inefficient. So what Java does is it comes with some built-in ones, libraries, that are really common that you might want to reference, but then it asks you to tell it which other ones that you want to import. So when I go to Google and I go Java, J-option pane, and I head to the documentation for it, this class. When I want to import it, I simply just look down this list and I can import exactly the JOption pane. I can also import some of its parent classes and it would work, but it's going to import things I don't need, which is inefficient. So we want to try and be specific. And I'm going to tell it to import javax.swing.jOptionPane. Sometimes NetBeans will note this and add it in automatically for you. But if it doesn't, what do we have to do? Well, JOptionPane now is showing an error. Cannot find symbol, it says, because I have no class named JOptionPane and I don't have it imported yet. On the left, NetBeans is going to give you an error message. It'll say add import for the JOption pane. I can just click on that. It'll automatically add it. You can type it in manually. You can have NetBeans add it in. You can even, if you want to remember this shortcut, Control-Shift-I. Control-Shift-I automatically will add in all of the imports for the code that you're currently working with, which is pretty handy. All right. So what does JOptionPane do? It's going to pop up a message that in a box that's going to ask you to type something in here. So let's see what happens when I run my code. It's going to print out testing 1, 2, 3 like above, but now it pops up this dialog box that says type something in. Whatever I put here, type something in is now the message, and I can type something in. Hello. Hit enter or hit OK. Now nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? Well, I got the input from a user, but I haven't done anything with it yet. JOptionPane show input dialog can actually return a string to me. If I go back here and I take a look at show input dialog, the one that I did here, it is able to request input from the user, and it also actually doesn't say it in here, unfortunately, in the documentation for this. But buried in all of these input dialogues, it will actually return information to the user as well. So something I can do is I can create a string. Maybe I'll call this the input that the user sends me. I'm going to set it to whatever I get from being typed in here. And then what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to print out the input that I got from the user. Let's comment out this here, and I'm going to just erase that here. Let's simplify our code up here a little bit. We'll keep that unless you want to reference it later. I'm going to get some input from a user by popping up a box that says type something in and assigning whatever they type in to a string called input. And then I'm going to print out the input. So it's going to pop up, type something in. This is a test. Let's hit OK. And it's going to print out, this is a test. If I comment out this printout and run it again, this is a test. Note, nothing prints out. This does not print anything out. It just requests information. I have to set it to some variable and then print it out if I want it to be actually printed out to the user. So something to keep in mind. Now, what will happen if I go int input? There's an error here. Incompatible types. String cannot be converted to int. This JOption pane is only sending a string back, so I need to take it as string information. So what happens if I want to be able to get an integer? Well, there is actually a way I can get an integer through this method, but I want to show you something else for now. We're going to use a separate strategy to gather user input. This time, right here in our program itself, not something popping up, but right here inside of it. And what I'm going to use to do that is something called a scanner. A scanner class, if we pull up, let me just get it on the side here. I'll go here, Java scanner. Scanner is a class in Java. And note that I have the actual reference to this class, the library reference, java.util.scanner. We'll see this popping up when we import it later. And what does it do? It's a simple text scanner which can parse primitive types and strings using regular expressions. Primitive types being things like ints and doubles, and strings, text that we know about. And there's a bunch of descriptions of how it works here. You can read it through if you're more interested in understanding it well. We got all of our constructors, all these different sources we can scan from. We can do things like scan from files, from certain paths in a program. What we're going to do here is scan from an input stream. This is kind of a metaphorical description. An input stream is kind of just like a set of flowing information. And in this case, it's going to be flowing from our keyboard. So we're going to define this keyboard input source in our constructor. And once we've instantiated or created our scanner object, we can then reference all of these methods. Look how many methods scanner has, all sorts of things that we can do. Some of the most important ones, next, finds and returns the next complete token from the scanner. The one that we want to use for what we're talking about right now, next int scans the next token of the input as an int, so we can get a number from the user input. So let's go back here. I have to define scanner. So scanner, I'm just going to call it scan. And what is it? Well, just like in Greenfoot, I need to say it's a new scanner. But we need to remember which constructor we're using. I need to tell it what its input stream is. You don't need to worry too much about what an input stream is now. I'm going to tell you the one that you'll be using for this project. System.in. There's still a problem though. Cannot find symbol scanner. This class hasn't been imported yet. So either go to the left side, add import, or press Ctrl-Shift-I. It'll say, do you want to import java.util.scanner? Remember, we saw that in the documentation. And now we've imported the scanner, and now Java NetBeans, in particular, knows how to use it. And now I can go scan dot and see all of those same methods listed here with their Java doc information. Scan next int. The description up here in the Java doc scans the next token of the input as an int. Let's use this. Next int. So when I run this method, what should be happening? Well, it's going to be looking for information somewhere. So let's run the program. Let's remember what we're looking at. We're first going to get a pop-up that says type something in. And you know what? Let's add this back in here. System out. And let's output the input to the screen. So hi pops out here. If you recall before, when I ran this, my program ended because it reached the end. But right now, you'll see that it's still running. Down here, you see information about all your running programs. What's happening? Well, I created a scanner, and now I'm waiting to scan some information. So actually, this program right now is waiting for me to type something in. Maybe the number 13. Hit enter, and my program finishes. How come it finished? Because it was just waiting to scan something. That's all it needed to do. I didn't actually do anything with the scanned information. Kind of like when I ran this up here, it ran, but it didn't really do much until I actually assigned it to a variable. So let's do that right now. Let's call this my_num, an integer called my_num. This works because it's expecting the next int. What might happen if I create this as a string? It's going to error, incompatible types. Int cannot be converted to string. So, beautiful, my program reminds me of the right variable type. And now I'm going to print out my num. So let's see here. I run my program, type something in. Let's type in my name. But the program's still running because now in my console, the other way of gathering information is here. Let's type in the number 13 again. And you'll see that it printed out 13 after I typed it in because it gathered that information from the user. Awesome. So now I have two different ways of gathering information from my users. And we'll be able to use this in our applications for all sorts of different things. Before we end this video, I just want to show you a clever way that we can use some of these different types of scanners. We can, and also talk about methods a little bit here, we can add some modularity into our program. Notice something like every time I want to gather some input, I have to type all this in. What if I made a method to do some of this for me to simplify things a little bit? So for example, I'm going to make a method just like I do in Greenfoot, public. In this case, I want to get a message returned to me, and this is going to be get input, a method I'm creating here. So I'm creating a method. It's not finished yet because I'm expecting to return something. So what is it that I'm going to be returning? Well, first of all, I want this to be running, but not the whole, not the type something in message. I want whatever message that I send to this method. So it's going to expect a message to be sent to it And this is the message that I want presented whenever the dialog box pops up. So the JOption pane is going to pop up with whatever message I send get input. But I want to return my results from this. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm simply going to say return, because JOption pane is going to send me whatever the response in that box was. And so right here, what I've done is I've created a method that's going to behave like the functionality of this line, but I can refer to it in a much simpler way. Let me show you. Rather than type all this in up here, assigning a new variable, doing this whole JOption pane thing, what I'm going to do instead is I'm simply going to print out, let me just remember my message here, type something in. So let's just remember that message. I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to say print out the input that I get from the user. What's the input going to be? Type something in. Now I'll notice one small thing here that's going to pop up. A non-static method cannot be referenced from a static context. You'll notice that I'm working in my main a static. Soon we'll talk about the different ways we access information, but I can't access this method directly right now without it being a static. So I'm going to make it a static, and then NetBeans is happy. So what am I printing out? I'm printing out the input that I get from the user with this message. Hopefully you're following. Press F6, type something, and it works just like before. Let's cancel this, and let's just end this here. I'm going to make a new message just to show that this really works. Here is the proof. It's a new message that I'm typing in, and here is the proof pops up. And I can type in something, thanks. Thanks pops up. So here's a modular way of making it a little bit easier to get user information that you can be clever with in your own coding. Last thing I'll show you here, my program's still waiting for the scanner to work. Remember that I'm only getting the next int. What do you think is going to happen if I type in 13 in this way? Let's try it out. Java is not happy with me. Java is throwing an exception, an error, input mismatch exception, the wrong type of data. So when I build my program this way, it's expecting that I actually send it a number because it needs to have the primitive int. There are ways around this error popping up. We're not going to worry about it in this course right now. You're just going to have some potential room for errors in some of your coding, but in the grade 12 course, if you take it, we're going to learn about something called exception handling, where we can force programs to only accept the type of data that we want. So what are we leaving off with this lesson here? We've learned a whole bunch of cool things that are really, really essential in our application coding. We've learned how to create a pop-up box that takes in a string, right? That gets a string information from the user. We've also learned how to use a different type of data gathering service called a scanner. This, we can gather more particular types of information. In this tutorial, I just showed you next int. On your own, I'd like you to practice trying things like getting doubles, or getting a Boolean, or getting the next string if it matches this exact string. So it's only going to get something if that string already exists. Explore the different methods inside of this class and see if there's other ones that you can implement, because you'll be totally allowed to implement different methods from some of these classes in your own work later on in this unit. So play around with these things, make sure that you have followed along. You can get what I've shown you to work, test out some new ideas of your own, and in the next tutorial, we are going to be learning about while loops and switch cases, another piece of logic that we're going to use to make our applications more user-friendly and easier to follow when we read through the code. See you then.